I don't see it. I want from nowhere. Met up with the gambler. We're about to time to sleep. And we know it's darkness. Roar the super. And he began to speak. He said, someone made a life. Bring on growing. Knowing what the cause of. I have their rights. Ah, hi Lipa. Can you help me on this question? Discuss the contribution of King Martin Luther to the civil rights movement. Okay. Let's swallow. And he brought me cigarette for a light. And night that death requires. Okay, schoolwork. We can have fun, but as for now, let's concentrate on our books. The question reads: discuss the contribution of Martin Luther to the civil rights movement. First of all, we have to know what is the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement, it is the movement by the blacks against the racial segregation which was implemented by the whites. The laws during that era favored the whites more than the blacks. Whatever was done by the government, it was on the favor of the whites, and the blacks were made the slaves of the whites being superior, being the lords of the blacks. So civil rights movement, it is the movement by the blacks against racial segregation. Right. Want to look on what Martin Luther did to achieve this civil rights movement, to make the civil rights movement come into pass, to make it a success. First, we'll talk about the Montgomery bus boycott. During that era, the bus was divided into two. That was there was the portion of the blacks and the portion of the whites. The blacks were not allowed to occupy the front seats of the bus, and the whites were supposed to occupy the front seats. And whenever the bus was full, the blacks were supposed to stand and offer the seats to the whites. There was the case of Rose Parker, who was arrested for refusing to offer the seat to a white person. Due to his arrest, many blacks were angry about the decision made by the government. They formed a mob. They combined and formed a mob, which was led by the king, whereby they boycotted the bus. They refused to use those buses. It led to the economy breakdown, since the economy during that era was mostly based on the transportation of people. So meaning, if the blacks had refused to use those buses, it contributed to the breakdown of economy. Due to that, the the government implemented a law whereby it allowed the mingle and mixing of people in bus, whether a white or a black. The laws favored both of them. They were supposed to mingle and mix in the bus. Let's take, for instance, in our contemporary societies, maybe in USA, this idea is still implemented, since in buses there is still mingling. The whites and blacks are treated the same. They mingle and mix in buses. Secondly, the king advocated for non-violent social right. The king was against violence. Even if his opponents were violent, the king advocated for non-violent. He wanted to bring resolution in a peaceful means. It didn't use force like what the enemies were doing. instead used non-violence, and he influenced many of his followers to use non-violence. This made the government of that era to realize that these people are not against us. They want to be with us. So this made the civil rights movement to be successful. Let's take for example, in India, they also used the non-violent activities to claim for their independence. They didn't use force against Britain, rather they used the non-violent to claim for their independence. However, Martin Luther differs from what Nelson Mandela did. At first, Mandela advocated for non-violence, but when he had realized that non-violence does not work, he advocated for violence activities to claim for the independence of the country. So, in this sense, we can say that Mandela and Martin Luther goes parallel, because Martin Luther was in favor of non-violence, which he implemented to claim for the civil to make the civil rights movement come into pass, while Nelson Mandela used the violence when he realized that non-violence does not work. Again, Martin Luther encouraged strikes. During that era, the blacks and the whites will work the same job, but at the end of the month, the blacks will go home empty-handed without payment, while the whites were paid fully. And the jobs which were done by the blacks were very difficult compared to those jobs which were done by the whites. But the blacks were paid few, even if they did more job compared to the whites. So the king, for them to solve this issue of job, of working conditions, the king encouraged the strikes, which lasted for 64 days. The strike lasted for 64 days. Uh, he encourages the strikes everywhere, in every department of the works. Every black was supposed to strike, to refuse to go to work until the law of being treated the same at work as what the whites were treated was declared. So the strike lasted for 64 days, and due to that, it led to the economy went to its knees, since the production was low, since the workers they've strike, so meaning the provision of production will be low. So this led to the blacks to be recognized and the making the civil rights movement to come into success. Fourthly, the king, in his famous speech I Have a Dream, he made the civil rights movement to come into pass. Right. In his speech, people were complaining about the working conditions. People were complaining about the racial segregation. People were complaining about the ill treatment of blacks, and the schools were divided. There were schools of the whites and schools of the blacks. People complained on that. So the king brought all these complaints and talked and discussed them in his speech. Due to that, he was a voice of the voiceless, and his voice was heard after collecting more than 200,000 people to listen to his speech. His voice was heard by the government of that era, and making the civil rights movement to be successful. Again, the king advocated for African American civil rights movement around in 1955 to 1968. Right. Its goal was to abolish racial discrimination in many areas, including public transportation, employment, and voting education. He, he, the, he what I can say is that he advocated for same treatment in both in America and in Africa. People to be treated the same, being against the racial discrimination, which after being advocated, he made many people to have that idea of and managed to influence whites that they should recognize the blacks and the whites as the same. Basically, what I can say is that the king advocated for voting rights, immigration and national services act and fair housing act. He was also concerned with the basics of dignity, respect, freedom and equality. That's what Martin Luther did to make the civil rights movement come into pass. So basically, the king advocated for 5 things to make the civil rights movement come into pass. These 5 things are his famous speech, "I have a dream," his non-violent activity, him encouraging strikes, fourthly, for African American civil rights, and another one is the Montgomery bus boycott. That's how Martin Luther, that's his contribution to the civil rights movement. So I guess if you have your test on Friday, you now know what the king did to make the civil rights movement come into pass. Now I'm continuing with enjoying myself. But no way to hold on. No way to hold on. No way to run. You never count your money. While sitting at the table, there is time of carbon. When it is done, every gambler knows that the sequence to survival is knowing what to throw in, knowing what to keep, cause every answer wins.